So today we have Seema with us, who will be talking about the role that nature plays in making cities more sustainable. Now, a lot of us have various well-meaning ideas about what should be done to make our city more green, more ecologically sustainable. And we often wonder what we could do as individuals to make this happen. Sometimes I think we are also frustrated by the fact that what seem like common sense ideas to us aren't really implemented by civic authorities. Um, I will learn today that sometimes there are reasons behind those decisions, as Seema will be addressing some of those questions. She'll also show us a different way of looking at urban greening based on her research and interactions with residents and other officials. So we'll use this call to learn from Seema about the various constraints that different parties in a city operate under and how we can use that knowledge to maybe arrive at a greening approach that serves the interests of as many parties as possible, if not everybody. So about Seema, our speaker. So Seema is a faculty at Azim Premji University, where she engages in teaching, research, but also importantly, communicating that research in an accessible manner to the general public. She has authored several peer-reviewed papers and popular articles, and has also co-authored several books with Harini Nagendra on themes of water, trees, and sustainability. And she's also interested in understanding the role of the media in communicating climate change. So I'll hand it over to Seema now. Before that, a quick note, please keep yourself on mute till the end of the presentation. And if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll take them up at the end. So Seema, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mandeep and Arjun and all of you all for inviting me for this talk. What I'm going to talk about here is essentially not just my work, it's the work of many of us who have been engaging with urban ecology and urban greening. I just thought we could start with this Cassia fistula or the Amalta's flower, because it's been a fiery summer in Bangalore, and this seems to reflect how hot we are all feeling. But it's also one of the pictures that we had taken in one of the residential layouts here in Sarjapura, where our university is located. How, in contrast to many layouts, some amount of careful planning of greening had gone into this, and we'll talk about this as in the talk as we progress. So to give a context to how we arrived at looking at urban greening, we started out by looking at some main questions, which is our main question was, what is the role that nature plays in making cities more sustainable, and how can nature also contribute to making cities more just and more socially just and equitable as well. So specifically placing these two questions in the context of different scales, we wanted to look at how are trees beneficial for the city, how are they beneficial for a particular neighborhood or a community, and how are they beneficial for an individual as for a single person in living in a city. So urban ecology itself as a discipline started gaining focus, predominant focus in the 1970s. And a lot of the cities in the global south, including in India, really did not have much research on urban ecology, because ecology was always seen as in the context of, say, a forest or a grassland area. Even deserts may have been considered as ecological spaces, but cities were never really considered as places where there could be urban greenery. It was always cities are built spaces, they are gray spaces, it's for a higher concentration of population, and there was never any thought about urban ecology. But in 2000 onwards, there was a lot more work that was happening. And in the context of Bangalore, Harini, who has been a co-author on all these papers, had started looking at urban green on certain spaces, certain cities, and certain themes. So this is just a set of publications that have come out, and broadly they cover these kind of research. So the research has looked at some of which I've been a part of, some of which was done before I even started working on urban issues. So the different kinds of spaces were researched as a part of this urban ecological work that she was doing. And I'm talking here about, of course, in the context of trees. I'm not talking about the lakes or cemeteries or any other areas. So the spaces that have been covered in the research are from roads, parks, slums, home gardens and apartments, even cemeteries in Bangalore we have looked at, temples and other sacred spaces, as well as one particular green spot, which is very specific to Karnataka, but maybe present in cities across India, called as Gundathops. So Gundathops are these wooded groves, which are traditionally planted by local communities to supply wood for the village. And certain species like jackfruit, mango, tamarind were planted, and the wood was used for any construction activity in the houses or for, say, the temple. And if any person, a landless person, needed wood for cremations or for any feasts during weddings, the traditional, at that time it was a caste-based village system, the Shanbok would tell them, you can cut the so-and-so branch of so-and-so tree and use it. So these are the different kind of spaces that we have looked at. In terms of topics, we've ranged from biodiversity to looking at how do trees contribute to maintaining microclimate in terms of what is the temperatures around shade, what is the temperature in an unshaded area of trees, looking at species diversity, rights and justice, and also perceptions on different kinds of trees. How do people see trees? Because each one of us has a different idea of relating with trees in cities. And cities, predominantly the work that we've done has been in Bangalore. But there is one paper which is related to Hyderabad and another which has just recently come out in 2023, which is looking at Kochi and Panjim. And we really do want to focus on smaller cities because I don't want to say that larger mega cities like Bangalore or Chennai are sort of beyond hope, but urbanization as we see it in the global south is going to take place to a great extent in cities. So it becomes all the more important to understand what is the kind of urban ecology that is there and how we can help or contribute to maintaining it. So the Kochi and Panjim work was done with Nandini Velo and Krishna Anujan. And they wanted to look at how the trees in these small cities, what are their uses and how do people see these trees as. So this is the broad work that we've been doing on urban greenery. There's another, so I'm just giving a background to show what led to all this, to these do's and don'ts that we have arrived at. Another kind of research that we have been sort of involved in has been this action research, which is, like I say, a very difficult to say no to category. These are usually requests from citizen groups who are trying to fight against some kind of tree felling. So one of the first things that we looked at was the proposed steel flyover that was going to come on Jai Mahal on Bellary Road and the road widening of the Jai Mahal main road. So the government had said that about 880 trees would be cut as a result of this project, but we did a census of all the trees that would actually be affected, and it was around 2,244 with multiple species. So the local groups, in addition to the citizen protests and cases, were able to use the report to say, look, the data is wrong. Plus, there were going to be other ecosystems and ecological damage. The carbon sequestered by the trees would be lost forever if this project was implemented. And since then, we have tried to help whoever has approached us, saying, can you do an ecological or environmental impact assessment of this road? Not all have been successful in terms of results. For example, the Outer Ring Road just before COVID, beautiful trees, large trees, even almost heritage species and keystone species, many of them were cut during the COVID lockdown, after the first phase of the lockdown. But there have been some successes, like the environmental impact assessment we did for Sankey Tank. The local RWA was so active, they used the report to go to the local councillor and argue with them why the tree cutting on that road would not serve any purpose of reducing the traffic congestion. Similarly, Kaban Park, as a smart city site. One of the parts of Kabar Park was identified as a smart city site, and what would be lost as a result of it. And we have partnered in this with different folks. For one of them is Vijay, who is also known as the tree doctor of Bangalore. So in doing all this, we were able to get engage with citizens groups. We were able to engage with government officials. We were able to engage with the advocacy organizations like the Bangalore Environmental Trust that filed a lot of the cases against these development projects, and also with and as a process, we learned a lot, in these engagements. So this book, which came out in 2019, was a sort of a kind of a time for Harni and me to sit and think about, cities and the trees that are there. What are the different kinds of species that would be interesting to have in a city, would be good to have, bad to have, maybe not. And also looked at different themes from biodiversity to biophilia, recipes and remedies. So, but the main idea which made us want to think of writing a book like this was, how can we use this to move beyond this constant binary of trees or environment versus development that we see in cities? Because on the one side, we are always engaging with citizens groups who are fighting. One part of the citizen group wants to have the metro, and yes, mass transport system is so important. On the other hand, there are other groups that in the same colony who want something else. So we were thinking about this, and that's how this whole became a large part of what the book was about. And finally, after the book was released, we were having multiple conversations in talks and all, and people said, it's all very fine for you to say plant trees. It's all very interesting and very warm and fuzzy, but where do we plant it? We are staying in apartments, we are staying in houses, there's very little space, we are worried about so many things, and we'll come to that. What are the concerns that citizens have when it comes to planting trees? What are the concerns that maybe the government has, which stops them or restrains them from planting trees? So that was the tree guide that was just released in January. We worked on it with one of our students, so it's an especially interesting project for us because she did all the illustrations, including this cover. So what I'll try to focus on in this talk, from whatever we have learned in these years of doing this work, very focused on trees here and very focused on city content. I'm not talking about, we wouldn't, for example, think of talking about ecological restoration in a grassland. This is very specific to urban areas. So these are the 5 broad things that I'll try to touch upon in this presentation. So, and these are questions that often come to us from different groups who are a part of the urban landscape. So one is, what kind of trees do we plant? What do we plant, only native, or can we plant exotic varieties, and where do we plant? There are so many different concerns that groups, depending upon which group it is, whether it's a government, whether it's houses, apartments, or corporates, what is their argument for choosing certain species of trees over other, and how can we address those concerns, and what is the case we can make for trees in this eternal, the fight or this binary between development and the environment? How do we prioritize? What are the trade-offs when we choose one, say a development project over trees, or trees over development projects? What are the things that we have to, that potentially come up? Not saying that we have answers to all this, because this differs so much on a case-to-case basis. So we work on certain, what we know as some kind of thumb rules when we have been approached. For example, when people ask us what kind of trees to plant, one of the things that we say is that, and this is true, ecologists will agree with this quite a bit, that you please don't plant monocultures, plant a mix of species. Recently, and even to 10 years back, there were a lot of reports about a particular species of trees in cities being affected by certain fungal. So there was a dieback disease of neem. In Bangalore, an entire stretch of Pongemia trees in HSR, I remember this was on social media a lot, was affected by a particular kind of a fungi or an insect. And essentially what happens if one tree is affected, and if it's a monoculture, is the entire stretch of them are affected, and it's very difficult to recover. Then also another thumb rule that we have always suggested is, if you're planting a tree, whatever is the kind of tree, we have to ensure that there are at least 2 uses. Can have more than 2, but the tree should have at least 2 uses. So not plant a tree purely for ornamental purposes, for example, which is what many people or many landscape and government folks tend to do. They'll plant a tree just for maybe a palm tree, which is purely an ornamental tree. But we are saying, if you're planting a tree, be conscious of at least 2 or 3. It could be a flowering tree, it could be a fruiting tree, it could be a mix of both. Plant if it has a large canopy. In some places that may not be possible, then prioritize something else. But it should have some more than one use. And this brings us to one of the biggest challenges and we have faced when people talk about greening a city. I remember sitting in one of the BBMP meetings, and the mayor was very enthusiastic because a group of us had approached him for taking up greening in certain areas of Bangalore. Now he was very enthusiastic. He said, I'm giving the full go ahead for this. And we had coffee, tea and samosa, and then we come out. And the engineers, then the people who had to implement it came to us and said, look, all of this is fine, but we have only 2 species in our nursery. So the agreement was the BBMP would give us the plants, and then the planting drive would be carried out by the people, the neighborhood community. They have only Pongamia and Bahonia in the species in their nurseries. So forget about this whole range of species that you have. These 2 we can give, we don't have. So the other thing is, if you want to plant certain kinds, if you want mixed species of trees, we want trees with multiple uses, we also have to think back about where we'll get these trees. They are, especially if we don't have that much funding to invest in it, the government nurseries are one of the best places to get them if you're thinking of citywide drives. So that is one thing. The other is the native versus exotic debate. And this is something that we have spoken of in depth in the book as well. So definitely we have to differentiate between exotics and the alien invasives. Native species, yes, they are great to plant, but we also have to think but we shouldn't maybe dismiss all exotic species in the urban context simply for 2 things. One is, we have exotic species that have naturalized over the years in India. Tamarind is a perfect example. We use tamarind and all, but it's a tree that has come from Central Africa. So it is an exotic in that sense, but it has been here for so many thousands of years, it has naturalized. But similarly, the royal palm has been here, but what use is the royal palm? When compared to, say, an exotic species like a tamarind, naturalized species like a tamarind, or an exotic flowering species, say a jacaranda. A royal palm really has no use. So it's possibly an exotic that you can avoid, and we must avoid. It doesn't provide shade, very minimal. You can see some bees may be attracted to it, but otherwise it's just a tree that is planted purely for aesthetic reasons. So if you were to choose between native and exotic, yes, native is great, but exotic also is not always bad, provided it is not an alien, it's not an invasive species. And the last thing is that we are in this, what we call the triple planetary crisis. We have biodiversity loss, air pollution, and climate change as a challenge. There is research, not so much in the cities in global south, but there are questions being raised about whether in this era of climate change, an exotic tree might prove hardier. And I'm talking about it again and purely in the context of cities. I'm not talking about forests. Talking about cities where you can do planned planting and care of trees. If you have a good plan for planting, you can actually ensure that trees grow, they don't become like invasors. So could there be something that, like, Bangalore today is so hot, most of the trees don't have any leaves in this time in the summer. So would you prefer to have some other kind of species as well mixed into this, exotics which have some evergreen tree cover as opposed to the deciduous species? We don't know. And that's again coming back to the thing that there's very little we still know about urban ecology, and something that there's so much research that is possible to do in the urban context. Where do we plant? Now, this is again a question that many of us have asked officials, whether it's officials, individuals, or RWAs in neighborhoods. So what again here we say is that there has to be, the choice of the tree has to be based on certain factors. Space, yes. A people may be a great tree. A ficus may be a brilliant tree because it is a keystone species. It has so much space for biodiversity. But in terms of space, it may not be the best tree to plant in a city. Again, the location of the trees. What kind of, which part do you want to have a highly a canopy, large canopy tree at a corner, as opposed to a large canopy trees at the center of, say, a circle? So there is no one plan that we can have. We can have broad guidelines on this. So if it is space related, then we can say that have certain kinds of species in certain kinds of spaces in spaces in the city. Maybe some trees may work better in parks and gardens, and some trees may work better in city on the side, on the avenues of streets. So that will require some choosing to be done. And also which city. If you're planting for, if there are a set of trees that are recommended for Chennai, we can't have them being planted in Bangalore. So recently, one of the groups in Chennai had reached out because they had been given the task of coming up with a draft tree act. Karnataka has a tree act for urban areas, but Tamil Nadu did not have, and Chennai did not have. So they came and said, can we use the tree species that are there for Bangalore? But that wouldn't really work. So the choice of trees also will have to be very city specific. And this is especially true for people who are involved in working in these things like drafting acts and laws for other cities. Also look at conventional, the unconventional spaces. So the conventional spaces in cities where we can find trees are parks, around lakes or water bodies. You can find avenue trees, but there are many places in cities, for example, under flyovers, near bus stands, empty plots of government land, under high tension wires, where you can have certain kinds of trees. Under high tension wires, we are now looking at a biodiversity park for Wipro in Tumkur, and they have a high tension wire running through their land. But so you can't obviously plant trees with a very high, of a great height there, but you can think of what other shrub-based trees that you can plant, trees which can grow and can be kept pruned. So there are high tension wires in the cities also can be used for this. So we need to think beyond these conventional spaces. Slums are, the research that Harni and some of the students have done on slums shows that people do want trees in slums, and they do have trees, from mango, drumstick to sometimes ficus, which becomes a social space for the community. But you have to think of it. Nobody will think of going to somebody in a slum and saying, do you want a tree? The usual questions that come to mind when we think of slums are only water, sanitation, other services, and facilities. But when actually they were asked, there were many who said, yes, we would like to have trees in slums too, because it provides XYZ things. And we'll look at that in a little going forward. The other is exploring certain options. So one of the things that, and we have included this in the tree guide about how to install a root barrier. And basically the idea of adding it into the manual, also tree guide, also came from this article that that was there in Deccan Herald about two boys in an apartment complex who knew that a huge ficus tree was going to be lost. So they banded together and they got a lot of people in the apartment complex. They contacted Vijay from Vriksha, who is also known as the tree doctor, and they set up this root barrier and saved the tree. So there are options like this that can be explored in some cases. Actually, in quite a few places, more so when you're thinking of planting a new tree, but it can also be done for existing trees as well. There is a cost element involved, but some trees like this ficus tree, which was so huge, it was well worth preserving and protecting it. So that is the call to take then, the cost versus, is this tree, how do you protect this particular tree? Is the cost that we're putting in does it justify the cost that is being put in, or should we just have it cut? So these are the questions. And in an apartment complex, this gets very complicated when you have multiple groups involved, multiple families involved. The other question was, how do we address concerns about trees? So this is very difficult, as we found out. So in our talks on around the book, we used to always get a whole range of reasons why people did not want to have trees in their house, either in their own house or in the road in front of their house or in the apartments. One was leaf fall. Who will clean up the leaves? We need to put in additional labor. After the leaf fall happens, what do we do with the leaf? And these are all, they seem silly, but these are genuine problems. So one of the localities in Bangalore, RMA extension, there were a lot of these, okay, I'm not getting the name, but it's one of those which sheds leaves during the autumn or during the fall season. And it was a concern of theirs that, we don't have any, there's so much leaf fall, we don't know what to do with the leaf cover. So we had to tell them about what the Kormangla RWA is doing with the leaf fall. But still, so that was one of the things. Then there are pollen allergies that people say they get because of trees. And anyone who has suffered from pollen allergies in Bangalore knows that it's such a debilitating thing. So it's a genuine concern. This is staining from fruit. I do not want to have a jamun tree in front of my house, because if I park my car outside, the fruits, or any other ficus for that matter, the fruits fall on it and they stain it, or the birds will sit on the fruit tree to eat it, and then the bird scat will stain my vehicle, which I have to then wash. They want shrubs, not trees, because we don't really know how, we're concerned about how the roots will affect our foundation. So we don't mind shrubs, but we don't want trees, because the roots will then enter into our sump and into the buildings and destroy the infrastructure. Sharing produce. If you plant a fruit tree, who is going to share the produce? Can anybody, if the tree is outside my house, can anybody who's walking by take the fruit? And one of them was, of course, thieves. They did not want trees near their balcony, because it's a way by which thieves could climb up to the first floor, at least to the second floor, and enter into the house. So these are the range of concerns that they have. And there is really no easy answer to this, but one of the things that has worked for Bangalore in the past is to consult with the people. So in the 90s, there was the forest officers, two forest officers, Shyam Sundar and Mr. Neginhar, who can be credited with a lot of the greening that happened in that period. And one of the things that they did was, when they were going to plant a tree, they would ask the people in front of whose house the tree was proposed, what species they would prefer. So the idea is that, if other than just planting whatever they thought was right, if they could ask the people what they specifically wanted, then there may be a greater investment by the people looking after the tree, or even, watering the tree, ensuring that it is not destroyed by somebody else. So recently we were doing a walk in Sarjapura, and most of the houses did not have too many trees, but there was this one house which had a huge Singapore cherry tree. So we spoke to the lady there, and she said that her son specifically wanted this particular Singapore cherry tree in front of her house. So we were wondering, why did he want that? Why did he want a Singapore cherry? So the curious thing is that he had a preference for a tree that he wanted. So people actually do have these preferences, and if you are able to take that into consideration, the chances that the trees will be protected is slightly higher. Not saying all the time, but slightly higher. Experience has shown that it does offer considerable amount of protection. Then, so the biggest question when it comes to urban trees is how we need land, we need to expand roads, we need to build flyovers, we need to build metros. The city is very congested. And the first victim always is the trees for any linear project, roads, metros, flyovers, anything. So it's always about, we can't go to somebody. There is one way of saying that, okay, don't cut trees, we want trees, but how do you argue for them? So we've been trying to use the ecosystem services framework to say, look, these are the benefits of trees for a city as a whole, for a neighborhood, and for individuals. Now, the city is an extremely conflicted, there's a lot of contestations in cities. Even in a neighborhood, there will be 5 houses that want, 5 houses that are indifferent, and 5 houses that don't want trees. And those 5 houses that don't want trees may even may be the cause as to why a particular flyover is not getting as much opposition as it should, as it happened with the Ejipura flyover. So what are the in trying to argue for trees in a city in this development versus environment debate, we've been trying to argue for the different kinds of uses that the services that tree have in terms of ecosystem services. So very quickly, ecosystem services is a framework that, where there are 4 ecosystem services that are looked at, which is provisioning, regulating, supporting and habitat, and cultural services. So provisioning services are the kind of, so ecosystem services themselves are the tangible and intangible benefits that people get. So provisioning services, anything from fruit, water, wood, medicines, anything that you get from, in the context here, trees. Regulating services are any kind of climate regulation, pollination, erosion control, water purification. Again, trees contribute to this. Cultural benefits would be educational, tourist, recreational benefits, or just a sense of well-being. How does nature contribute to spirituality? And finally, the supporting and habitat. What kind of biodiversity and what kind of habitat for species does urban nature or urban ecological spaces provide? And again, in this case, trees. So whenever we have done the environment impact assessment for the different development projects, one of the things that we have tried to do in almost in all is to find out that if the trees are cut, what will be the kind of carbon sequestration that was happening that is lost. So this is an example. The green box is an example of trees in the Ejipura flyover that were going to be cut. So we went, how do we do this EIAs? If it is for smaller stretches of road, we walk on the road, identify the species, take a measurement of the diameter, eyeball the height, and using these details, we are able to calculate the carbon that is sequestered using a allometric equation, a formula that is used. So we found that from this 199 trees on a 1.4 kilometer stretch, 180 metric tons of carbon was being sequestered. So if the trees are lost, how much of that carbon is lost? So that is one way that we have included, tried to talk to officials and to people saying, look, this is what you will lose if trees are not, if you cut trees. The second is reducing heat. Walking on a treeless avenue versus walking on an avenue with where there are trees. So the graph on the right side, it shows the difference. So this was a research that was done by students in Honey in quite some time back, but where 10 stretches of road were compared. And on each stretch, there was a stretch which was under the shade of the trees and another stretch which was not under the shade of the tree. And they did both ambient temperature measurement, surface temperature of the road, as well as SPM, the suspended particulate matter. So this graph shows the road surface temperature in a stretch with and without trees. So if you can see that at around 12:30 in the afternoon, the stretch without trees and with trees, there's a difference of literally 26 degrees centigrade temperature. So that's a huge difference. It's almost a difference, and it shows why trees become important in a city, because if there are no trees, your first instinct is to take some other form of transport. If you can afford it, it's an auto. After a point of time, you'll say, okay, I'm done with walking on these roads. I'll just buy a car. And that again contributes this whole cycle of global warming and heating up of the city. So this is one. And this graph, when we have done any interactions with the BBMP officials, has proved to be quite, eye-catching for them, eye-opening for them. Because they say, oh, there's so much difference. So at least they begin to think. The other benefits, if you look at, is mitigating air and dust pollution and habitat for biodiversity. In one of the EIAs, 2 of the EIAs actually that we did, one for the Sankey, the blue steel, the steel flyover, and as well as the outer road, it was a habitat for biodiversity, including a species like the slender loris, which is a primate and is an endangered species. So in terms of protection, in terms of providing a habitat, in terms of the kinds of biodiversity, especially keystone species like ficus and all provide, it makes a huge argument. When you have something like a Strendylosaurus in the city, it automatically, you may not always have a species like this, but there is considerable biodiversity that a keystone species would provide a habitat for. Then mitigating air and dust pollution. This is the same experiment, this is the experiment that was conducted on the same stretch of the road. So these filters were placed in the stretch with trees and without trees. And you can see the difference. The stretch without trees, the filter had turned completely black, but the one with trees was less bad. So that again is very stark to show that how trees help to settle dust pollution, and some amount of sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxides are absorbed by the trees. And again, here the kind of species becomes important. What kind of species do we want? The species which have tiny hairs on their leaves may be better for dust pollution. There may be certain species that may work best around industrial areas for settling some other kinds of chemical pollution. The other benefits of trees that we try to speak about is the social spaces and cultural and sacred spaces. So this, when I was asked to send a picture that was representative of the talk, I had sent the picture on the right. So this is again taken in Bangalore in the outskirts. This is near a construction site actually. And when the parents are all working, they have the Anganwadi, it was holiday and the Anganwadis for some reason were not open. So they had tied these saris onto the tamarind tree, and the kids essentially would just go to sleep there while their parents were working. So this is a kind of use of space that a government document cannot think about, or a landscaper or designer will normally not think about. But the avenue trees are used in so many different ways. And this is one of the ways as a social space. Of course, people sit under the shade of the tree and do a whole range of activities in slums. Then there are also cultural and sacred uses. In Bangalore, perhaps one of the most visible of this is the Ashwath Kattis. So if you see roads there, you have these platforms with the two peepal trees and a neem tree, and these with some shrines, either snake stones or other shrines at the foot of the tree. And usually they are the last to be removed, or the trees are the last to be cut, even if there is a road expansion happening, because of its sacred significance. Ultimately, sometimes the road wins, as the outer ring road showed, but we still have roads in Bangalore where the kind of road diverges when there is an Ashwath Katti. And it's simply because of the cultural and sacred use. Again, it's a bit of a double-edged sword sometimes because it's religious and there may be certain people may be cautious about it. But we also find people worshipping trees in parks. Or there's one, I've been seeing this, observing even a royal palm actually outside one of the layouts here. Initially, it was just a royal palm, and I didn't notice anything. And the second time I visited, I saw that somebody had put a picture of a god. The ones that you want to throw, but you really don't want to throw, end up usually under the peepal trees in cities or stuck between the atti mara and all. So this was a picture of God. I was wondering why this image was there under a palm tree. Since when did the palm tree become so sacred? So it turns out there's a termite mound under the palm tree. So they had put that there. Then after the third time I went, there was an idol of a Buddha there. So slowly, so the way the urban folks make sense of the place, the cultural and the sacred uses is also very, very fascinating. When the older house I stayed in Malleshwaram, every morning when I was coming to the university, there's this gular or the ficus racemosa tree outside my house, and there would be these people who would every morning on their walk take one circumambulation around the thing because it is a sacred tree. And I remember our manager one day, he was quite angry because somebody had come and put a little bit of turmeric and vermilion and under the tree. And he said, look, in another few days, it will become a shrine, and then we can't do anything if we need to trim the tree or anything. So there is always this cultural and sacred use that is, we don't pay attention to, but is happening all around us. If we look, we will see the strange objects appearing under trees. And in a city, yes, one of the biggest reasons is for health and recreational purposes. I'm sure many of us would not, many of the younger generation won't even know that how much we played. People played with like the gulmohar trees, or even this game called Marakoti. It's called as Marakoti in Kannada, but apparently this game is also played in a similar way in many different cities. So just for health, recreational purposes, for well-being, also trees play a very important role. And if you're looking at it from the social justice angle, for the individual, especially for the urban poor, trees we have found, and we see it all the time in our research, is they are useful as a food source. If you look at, even if you're passing in a bus, if you're crossing a slum, you'll see more than one drumstick tree in the slum. And when we've spoken to people, they have said, yes, some days when we have absolutely no money, we just take the leaves of the drumstick and add it to some soppo, as a soppo to some palya or sambar, so that there is some nutrition. They have their own arrangements about sharing the drumstick. They also use these the produce from trees for subsistence use, like oil, medicine, firewood. So this lady, the photograph in the center, this lady is sitting in Karmalaram station, and I was waiting to catch a train back from campus to Malleshwaram, and I was asking her, what is she doing with these honge seeds? These are all honge seeds. She's sitting and cleaning them. So there's outside the railway station, there is the avenue trees are all honge trees. And she said that her daughter comes to work in the mornings and she comes along with her, and she collects these honge seeds in the season, and then they dry it and they extract oil from it, which they use as for burning lamps in their house. So this is some kind of different kinds of subsistence use. Then there's a support to livelihoods. If we just pay attention, we'll see that a lot of the perishable items, be it faded clothes, flowers, vegetables, fruits, you see these vendors trying to look for a place under the shade of the tree, and they have a reason for it. In the Hyderabad study, the vendors also said that trees give them, in their own words, something called sukoon, a sense of peace, in addition to providing them this livelihood. Because if you're trying to sell DVDs or T-shirts in the sun, they will fade. So they tend to use the shade of trees. And it's not very random, because there is a space allocated, there is a space based on seniority, and they have their own ways of allocating this space. So in conclusion, what we have tried to see when it comes to urban greening is, yes, we must plant trees, but with a lot of care, depending upon the kind of species that are useful, depending on the kind of space that is available, and also people's preferences. Also, citywide planning, greening must be in a part of the plan and not as an afterthought. Normally, the thinking of officials will always be, I need to allocate X percentage of a city space for greening. But there's a lot of push towards it, and slowly the change will happen very slowly. At least now Bangalore, thanks to the efforts of a lot of citizen groups and advocacy organization, has at least asked for a census of the trees to be conducted. Then engage in whatever capacity we have, so that we can, talk about this. Sometimes we may have to give up a certain tree, but what is the alternate to that is what we have to ask the government. So we've said every time in our EIS also, that if you are cutting a tree, please don't promise that you will plant 60,000 trees somewhere else. We need to have those trees planted in a 1 kilometer radius of where it was cut, because otherwise, what is the use? The roads will lose all the benefits that the trees were providing. So the only way we feel to do it is, in addition to the activism, the cases and everything, is to constantly beat at this. And it will take time, but hopefully we hope that smaller cities which are on the cusp of urbanization will be able to use these ideas of urban greening much more. So yeah, that's about it. We just want to say that I'm doing this presentation, but it is a reflection of a lot of our work, too many years, students, interns, and researchers, and supported by the university. And yes, this tree guide, which is for planting, can be downloaded for free from the website. And if you want a hard copy, please write to me, and we can have we can have a hard copy sent to you. Also, we are trying to bring out a kind of a manual on as a tree planting, urban greening guide from species, census, what kind of an ideal tree act. And hopefully once that is done, we will be able to share that freely as well. That's a part of come up this year. So I will stop.
Thank you so much, Seema. It was really wonderful to hear the talk on urban greening. And there were some really interesting points that I mean, I was just thinking about how you even did that study on the surface road temperatures and how that to kind of show very tangibly what are the, what are the benefits of having trees over walking paths and things. Um, so I think like you said, it will be really nice to open up for questions, and there are already a few questions on the chat. So I'll just read them out, I think, one by one. And as we go along, we can take the others. Yeah. I think in the middle, you started talking about, one of the challenges is under high tension wires. And how do we think about trees in that area and what is possible? Sameer was asking on this, can we have more insights on how do you deal with high tension lines and trees that could be planted underneath?
We may not, like we were saying, this factory out that we're working on in Wipro, they have a high tension wire running through them. And the rule is that under it, you cannot plant any trees and 3 meters on either side. But that is for the definition of trees. But you can plant some kinds of shrubs. If it is a private space, you can even keep those shrubs at a particular height. It could be like something like the peacock flower tree or the lipstick tree or something like that. It is easier if it comes on, say, a corporate land or also on a private land. It's harder if it is on a government land. So to give a context to where this whole idea of unconventional spaces came, we have the Center for Sustainable Employment in the city, and they were looking at an urban employment guarantee scheme, and they wanted it to be green jobs, similar to a MGNREGA, but in the context of cities. And at that point of time, they had approached and said, look, can you give us, in rural areas, it's very easy, right? You have lakes and ponds and gomalas and all as common land. What are the places in the cities that we can think of? So we had given this exhaustive list in addition to parks and lakes and whatever, saying that high tension wires, below high tension wires can be an option for certain kinds of trees. And again, this will require consulting with the government, consulting with the ward level, but there may be some spaces that you can do it. Not all high tension wires will be possible, but some of them, opting for species that don't necessarily grow very tall.
And further to those this question, I mean, one is about high tension lines, and then you see, and yeah, shrubs would be obviously a very interesting example of how we can take that. Are there limitations? Is there like a size limit or a height limit that they recommend even for shrubs? Is there something like that?
There isn't, because nobody has thought of planting under it. So that's one of the things we want to bring out in that manual, that we're saying that, look, what could potentially be it's not a space that anyone would think of for planting. But whatever it is, it should not be something that is very fast growing, because then you have to keep trimming all the time. There has to be a shrub, and it can be one of those lower, the ones that do, for example, this oleander could be one of those species. It could be the peacock flower. You can even have calotropis to some extent in some spots, because that's again attracts butterfly species. So, and there are also some. When we say unconventional spaces, we are also talking, high tension wires, one example, but we are also talking of spaces like schools in cities. You may have space to plant a couple of trees in a corner somewhere. So it has to be space. It has to be this thing specific. But look at the city as a whole, not just as only those designated green spaces that we always think about. That's what we're trying to push for.
Sameer, does this answer your question, or would you like to add something here for more clarification?
No, yes, it does answer my question. But the whole thing was about identifying species and going about the whole thing. Any recommended distance below the line, especially in terms of safety of people working there during the plantation? That's one thing I would like to know.
So ideally, I'm not an expert on this, but ideally, the safety expert, you'll have to really check again. But something that does not grow more than, say, 2 meters. That's it.
Okay, but it's safe for people to work under there. Because
That
we'll
is
have to
that
do
is that is
watering.
that is going to be the tough thing to convince. So it will not, you can't put the shrubs directly under the high tension wire. So high tension wires will have a space on both sides, right? Under the
Okay.
wire, nobody will allow, even the government will not allow. 3
No.
meters on either side, there is a buffer. And beyond that buffer, there is still extra space, which we have seen in along these roads. That's where you can plant. That need
I,
not be left empty.
I am asking because we got an offer
Hmm.
from the local authorities to
Hmm.
plant under that could be around 30-40 acres of land,
Hmm.
which is right under the high tension wire. So we were wondering whether to take it up or not. Shrubs and all that we can understand. But
Hmm.
what about working safety? That was a question on my mind.
That will be, I mean, I don't know about the safety part of it, the trees of it, but yeah, it's sorry, I wouldn't know about the safety. It's a bit, you'll have to ask the electrical folks about exactly how. If I said
Yeah.
it's safe and then something happens, it would be, so I'm not.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Seema.
Thanks, Seema. Thanks, Samir, for those questions. I think
But
next.
can I ask, this is very interesting that they have actually given you the option of planting. That's really nice.
Yeah, yes, they have.
That
Yes,
is
they
really
have.
nice. Yeah.
And that's a long stretch of land. And they said, we'll give you water also, but are you ready to take up the responsibility? And about 20, 30, 40 acres in a city,
That is great.
that is huge.
Huge. Yes, I think you should definitely take it up. I mean, if you can have the bandwidth, yeah. Do let us know, please. Let us know where
I
it is
will.
so we can also come and see.
I will.
Really would be interesting.
I will do that. I will do that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. So another question that we had is from Vinita, and she says, would be useful to know, if possible, what is the process for citizens to take up planting and care in a space like road, median in their neighborhood? Any best practices or protocols that they can follow, or who can be contacted? So,
So first in a city would be that we'll have to check with the local ward committee, the area sabha or the ward committee members to see if you will be allowed to plant. You'll see a lot of people planting on August 15th on medians, but those saplings disappear because one is you're not allowed to plant, so the government comes and plucks it out. Even the government also plant. So one is approach the local councillor and through them figure out where they can plant and they can allocate the land for it. And the best practices and protocol in terms of that is the main thing with planting is who will take care of it. So we were told, and I don't know if this is still true, that if it is a BBMP or it is a government planted this thing, then they have watering facility only once a quarter or something. So you have to really be clear about who will take care, who will water. You'll have to have guards to prevent cows or any other goats from eating. So it's quite a process. Just planting is easy, but yes, so you'll have to ask. Better than medians, I would say, is find a local park or a plot, neighborhood park, and ask them if you can use a part of that neighborhood park for planting. So one part of it can be for the walking and the children's play area, but give a certain part for us to plant and grow trees. Medians can be a little tricky because you may get frustrated just trying to negotiate the process with the government. So I would say go for the easy, low-hanging fruit.
thanks, Seema. I think there was one very interesting, I had observed when I was traveling. I found that there were these. This was in New York, where they had taken up these urban parks and decided that there were small groups of people who would take ownership, or they would create societies around that park. And then their main role was to ensure that these parks get restored. So they were focusing on rewilding those parks altogether and actually bringing back native species in some way into that area. And they would have these societies that take care of each park and actually look at the maintenance. There'll be little boards about each tree that are there. And I think those are also some efforts that citizenry can take on to really make a more meaningful experience in those spaces.
I think where we get bogged down is when we think of the city. I mean, it's so large. But what is possible, and I'm not saying it's easy, what is possible to do is at the neighborhood level. It'll require getting to the ward councillor, talking to them. But yes, that is a useful exercise. And in Kerala, they have this urban employment guarantee scheme where actually lots, if it's a private lot, it is taken as a lease. Otherwise, public lots are used for exactly this. People can plant vegetables even, or flowering and fruit species trees. They can use the produce, sell the produce. The laborers can sell the produce. So there is, and they're also planting trees in these round circles. They're called Pachaturutha. So that, these are all fruit trees, and the community is waiting that, okay, 10 years from now, we can actually get those fruits. So there are these ways of doing it. Maybe we shouldn't ambitiously focus on, like, city seems intimidating, but smaller pockets, yes.
Definitely. And then it would get a lot more people involved in that way as well, right? I think there is another few questions around. One is about the cutting down of trees, and you were talking about it earlier as well in your presentation. So is it possible to the one question is around translocation of these trees. There are people do talk about these methods of removing it from the root and relocating them. And is that possible? Have you seen that happen? What is your opinion around this?
It has happened. It has happened right here on Sarjapura Road as well, but it is prohibitively expensive. It takes about, for one tree, 6 lakhs or 7 lakhs, and then you have to find a space for it. And whatever trees have been transplanted, it has been found that they don't, after all that cost, they don't flourish as much. Maybe they may take some time to grow, but they really don't grow so well. So transplantation can be done maybe of like certain trees. These trees were transplanted because they were huge, not massive, but huge enough ficus species of trees. So transplantation really, we would say, is like a last option. And that's also another thing that, we've been asked often about, can you value the tree for us? Can you do a valuation of the trees that will be cut, and then we can add it to the project cost? But we've been very hesitant to do that, because once you value it, then you can just pay that value and cut the tree. So we've said, no, we should go with the don't cut the tree principle. Transplantation is really doesn't work. That it's not that effective. It's extremely expensive.
And adding to this question, Sana also asks this. She's asking about, also, how can one argue against cutting of trees, even if trees are planted instead, because they cannot compensate the ecosystem services provided by nature, by mature trees, right? So that's one point. But then the second part is then even how do you also look at citizens' perception, and what do they want from that area? Are there ways of incorporating that? Because it might, so her question really is, how do you think of incorporating citizens' perceptions regarding trees and being mainstreamed, considering it is a cumbersome job? How does all of that, how does citizenry and public needs all come together in some way?
This is as you said, one of the challenging and continuing challenges of our question. So all I can say is that at the end of the day, if there are any trees that have been protected in Bangalore, and it's true for other cities, it is because citizens have had certain attachments and perceptions, and they have been willing to come out on the streets and fight it. It's only then that has happened. But again, it's not that easy either. And I don't know if I'm answering the full question here, but if you have a metro line that is coming up and say a certain amount of trees are going, the metro line is actually a mass rapid transit system in that sense, right? It does take a lot. It may, so is it okay if certain number of trees go? So it's not easy. I mean, I wish this is a continuing question. I wish I had an answer, if we had an answer. But the only way is to negotiate, I guess. Use a mix of all these options. If there is a specific tree that is very valuable, which is of some heritage, like Bombay, there is a tree, you won't even realize it. We saw it. One of the very young kids found out this is a part of a Forest of Life exhibit. It was planted by this person, who's the person who found Victoria Falls? What's that famous line? Mr. Livingston, yeah, David Livingston. He had planted this tree in, so that's a heritage tree. Then preserve that. But it's very tough. But at the end of the day, whatever can be done will be done through pressure from citizens only. And because they have an attachment towards the trees. And that is also one of the reasons why many of the campaigns tend to fall apart also, because there is so much of fissures in a group. One group in a same locality wants trees, another group wants the flyover. So there is no coming together of it. But wherever there has been success, it's because of people pushing. I don't know. I mean, it's a tough question. I wouldn't even want to.
Sana, I'll open it up to you, since if you want to add or ask more questions around this.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for answering. I know it's a very difficult question to ask you, especially one can have an impetus from the side of the citizens, but it's difficult to mainstream this because except for if you start getting a lot of empirical evidence, I believe that the citizens' involvement has, for instance, facilitated the preservation of green spaces or even the protection or maintenance of it. But I know this is a difficult question. I just wanted to know your perspective. But thank you for answering. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sana, and thanks, Seema. Another question that I wanted to, that I thought we can bring up is, you know, just thinking about the water crisis that we had in Bangalore recently, and there were rules going around on this, that you can't water plants and you can't do this and other things. So Lisa had actually brought up this question, and she says, do you have any experience or insights with regard to tree planting and transitioning to more climate appropriate species, and planting plants in large swaths of army land, specifically in Bangalore? So just
Planting,
planting on army land, specifically in Bangalore. So I think there are two parts on this. One is about climate appropriate species and how would that work? And the second part is, what about this army land that is there? Could those be used for tree planting in any way?
So the army land thing I'll take first. That's a relatively easy one. It's already in the city. If we look, it's the cantonment area and the army area that already have a lot of trees. They still have the maximum amount of greenery in their plots, but they could, if they had a committed plan, they can still plant in a lot of spaces. So that is an option. If you're thinking of unconventional spaces, then that will be an option. But so another thing that we have constantly heard with planting, whether it is corporates, whether it is governments, is why they don't want to plant is, you activists will come again in another 10 years or 5 years down the line if you plant, and if you want to extend the road, saying that you can't cut these trees. So that is another reason why they don't want to plant in the same area. While we are saying there is no point planting 60 species, 60 saplings somewhere else, you have to plant where the trees are lost. This is their argument. If we plant the trees, then you guys only will come in another 10 years when we want to widen the road. So that is the thinking, right? And that's what they'll say, even if we say plant in army land. So corporates also think like that. We don't want to plant trees because suppose we want to use this land for building a building, then the whole process of getting the trees cut is just too complicated for them. That's why they leave this huge amount of land vacant. So yes, if you can convince them and they have a long-term plan of spots which they know will not absolutely be used for future construction, army land would be great. Would be an easy place to, if you can get in touch with the army folks. The climate related species, so that's one of the things that they had mentioned in the talk as well, that we don't know in the urban context enough. And that's why we say that the urban ecology, especially in global south cities, is so understudied. There is so much potential research that we can do. What are the species that could actually be more climate resilient? There could be an exotic species. Should we plant it? What about the long-term impacts of it? So we've told time and again, whenever we've given talks, that please, if anybody is interested to look at urban research, we would be more than happy to work with them. There are some climate planting exercise, climate-friendly planting exercises that are happening in forests. in Canada or somewhere, Brunei or some other places, this is happening in forests. But not yet. We haven't heard of Germany. They were trying some species, but Indian context, we haven't thought of any, because there's no planting only happening. There's only cutting happening in cities.
And yeah, thank you, Seema, for that. I think, Lisa, do you have any follow-up questions on this?
No, thank you so much for answering. I happen to be in the cantonment area of Bangalore and surrounded by army land. And in fact, a large part of under one big ficus tree was recently set on fire, which broke my heart. So I think my only question would be, yeah, if you have had any experience or working with army or, working with them in any way, because that's something that I would want to look into.
No, but if you know somebody from the army, see, the rules for cutting will have to apply the same. So if they cut the tree, they would have had to follow some protocol and some procedure. There's a tree act. They would have had to say why and put up a notice and all. So that should have happened, irrespective of where the tree is, because it's for the Karnataka Tree Protection Act that is required. But I don't know if there are exemptions for army areas. There may be.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, Seema. So there's another question that we have here, which is now it's moving a little bit from, so I think we'll take a question on carbon sequestration first, and then there's a question also around food as a possible greening method, right? So the question on carbon sequestration was by Valari was asking, can you please share how you calculate the carbon sequestration potential of a tree in this context? Right? Okay,
so we have used a certain formula, and if you mail me, I can share you that. But very quickly, what that does is, so a tree is, there's some standard thing, right? So a tree is taken as like a sphere. So the volume of a sphere is pi r square h. So the formula for this is pi r square h into taper value into wood density. That's how we do it. So the wood density, there is a database. Depending on the species, what is the density of wood that's freely available on the global density database. The taper value for forestry species is given as 0.06. There's a paper for that. So the thing with carbon calculation is there are multiple ways and formulas of doing it. We have applied one formula. Suppose somebody applies another formula, you may get a different value. Both are correct, but it depends on which formula you applied, which wood density you used. If you write, there's my email. If you can share my email ID, Arjun, with anyone, I can share the references and the entire material of how we have done that. The details of it.
What we'll do is, anyway, after the webinar, we'll share the recording of the webinar, as well as your email ID with that, so that people can reach out to you, if that's fine. Right?
So then I can send it to them how to do the calculation, where they can get the sources and things like that. I can.
Okay. In the middle, when we are talking, I think somebody from Parisara Trust had raised their hand. So I think I'll just ask them if they want to ask their question.
Hey, thanks, Arjun. This is Raj from Parisara. I'm in Bangalore. So thanks, Seema, for the presentation. It's kind of, I want to get somewhere. There's an objective behind this. So let me ask you this kind of query in that context. Is there a report that's already there or something we can prepare? I pretty much know the answer in terms of the consequence, but just sort of curiosity in terms of compensatory planting, right? So BMRCL did it. A number of other folks have done it. They chop the trees in one place. They talk about compensatory planting in another place. So I think we need to highlight these to the upcoming folks, and some of it may have been done. I'm still working through the EIA on the PRR and the STRR. So my question was in that context. So as we have more of these urban development initiatives come by the pipeline, is there a way we can highlight to them as part of the EIA input or in some other manner that compensatory planting doesn't work, or the alternatives to compensatory planting, if you will, and kind of put a paper together just around this topic. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, that this is also one of the things that we've been thinking about. It's really much needed. See, one of the things we also wanted is before they do the project, for example, if it is a whatever road or what this thing, before they decide the alignment itself, they should let people know. Because another argument always has been, oh, we have decided the alignment, it's too late to move the road thing. So there could be places where you could actually make the trees that are going to be cut a part of the median, right? Cutting through the tree. So it would be really good to have some kind of a guidelines which the government could follow, saying before they decide on a project, much before they do the DPR or much before they come up with the final plan, they should also incorporate this. Show us what is your proposed alignment. Then we can rework on why it should possibly not go like that. So this Chevala Banyan case is perhaps one of the most recent one that has been like a ray of hope for people, right? So that they've showed how that alignment is completely unnecessary. And so yes, we should definitely put something together. And we were hoping to do that as a part of this manual that we're putting together, but it's taking quite some time. So we can really, if you have something in mind, that would be really useful for everyone.
Okay,
Please.
let's start the conversation offline. Thank you, though. Thank you.
Thanks for that question.
And I did have the opportunity to meet and learn about the Chevala case in person, so that was great last month. Thank you. She was honored by one of the civic groups recently in Bangalore.
Yeah, I mean, that was such a heartwarming judgment after so much of it's all thanks to the group that fought this right up.
So I think there's another question around so there are two separate questions, but they kind of tie in very well with each other. So Ruchi is asking about how many states or cities in India have an urban forestry management plan, and
How many
tying into
sorry, I didn't get that. How many
states or cities in India have an urban forestry management plan?
0.
Right? And then, because there was a short answer, I think the next question on that, Badri is asking, how do we go about inducing the government to formulate a tree act where there is none, right? So, or if it is the city urban forestry management plan, or either of the two, how would they work?
Urban forestry management, nothing. There is some urban forestry and greening guidelines 2014 that are there, but I don't think anyone is aware of that. It is very much needed that there should be a national level, and that's again segueing into the Tree Act, that you need to have some kind of a national tree protection act for urban, specific for urban areas. Again, the reason for that is that urban areas, you may want to plant certain different kinds of trees or cut certain other kinds of trees. So a specific act for those for urban areas. There are acts, there are state acts, there are city-based acts. And Manju Menon and Kanchi Kohli have brought out those urban greening guidelines, a PDF, which could be very useful for people who are interested, comparing the different acts, the goods and the bads and the advantages and the disadvantages. So some of the acts are quite good in the sense that they do provide a lot of checks and balances before cutting trees. The Pune City Act, Tree Act, for example, is one of them. The challenge is to get the best of all this and condense it into one proper act, which is what we're trying to do again in that manual we're preparing. What should go into a tree act, whether at the national level or at the state level? What are the basic 5-6 things that need to go in? And then what should the guidelines or the rules say in detail? So it's needed. States have, cities have. Some of them are good, some of them are highly inadequate. They keep getting changed. But this document by Manju Menon and Kanchi Kohli is available freely. It will give you a sense of the different acts to look at.
Thank you, Seema. I'll open it up to Ruchi and Badri if they want to have any follow-up questions on this.
No, that basically answers the question. 0 was very specific, and so we've been wanting to have something like that in Dehradun. I'm calling from Dehradun. So there's a lot of tree cutting and all going on, especially in the cities. So that is why I wanted to know. We are trying to work on it. So thank you so much. I'll look into this document by Manju Menon and Kanchi Kohli. Hopefully that will help. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ruchi. And I think on the chat, we had some comments on this topic itself. So Varsha Mishra was saying that, Delhi does have a green action plan under which they allocate plantation targets to different greening agencies. And Badri was adding here that as far as he knows, that only Maharashtra, Karnataka, Delhi, and Uttarakhand have a tree act.
So there are a few more, but yeah, but that yeah, I don't know the exact number, but it's there in that they have done a full listing.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Seema.
There are a lot of rulings on court rulings as well, which are there, which Chandigarh and all these places they have on how to protect heritage trees. Lucknow, I think, has. So there's a lot of mix. It's all here and there. It would be really great to put it all.
Well, I think that's exactly what Samir was suggesting. Can we have compilations of instances? So one is of people in cities, towns that have made a big difference, but also maybe is there a common place that we can have where we know all these different literature to refer to, especially in the urban context. So that might make it easier for citizen groups or citizenry to take on other, especially when there's tree cutting or anything else coming, so they know who they can rely on.
I mean, there's so much to learn from the people who have been successful, actually. I mean, if we look at some of the citizens groups here, the recent Chevala group, they've just been amazing, right? And how they have managed to just hang on with sheer will do it. So those are the people who can really help with what strategies they use. So let's see. I mean, we hope that even we can bring in some of those into the manual, and we're very happy if others have used different strategies, if they can write in and help, and we can acknowledge. So we all have this together, and we intend it to be an open source thing, which anybody can use. So say somebody from a very small town is concerned about cutting the trees that are being cut, and has no idea how to go about it. So this is something that will take them through how setting up a citizens group, finding people who are staying, or even being a lone warrior, starting off as a lone warrior. So let's see. But yeah.
No, that'll be amazing, and I think we would love to, when it is ready. It'll be really nice to push this out onto and share it with everyone as well. I think now just moving back onto the, I think one question that was left in the middle was about. Let me just pull it up. So this is from the messages from Madhura. She says, "Hi Seema, lovely talk. What do you think about urban greening for food movements that are popular in Europe, etc.? Can we adapt those ideas for some urban spaces in India? Community gardens for vegetables and such."
Yes, most definitely. And we already have a state government that's doing it. So we know that it's not impossible. Of course, it's an outlier like Kerala, but they are doing exactly this. They are planting fruit trees, thinking of food security and who can access them into the future. They also are giving open plots of land for doing farming, and patches of, whether it's schools or anganwadis, or even leasing out some land from others and doing, if it's open and nothing is built on it. So yes, it is definitely possible, and we should do it, because I mean, in the urban context, food security is critical for all of us, but more so for the urban poor when everything is so expensive. Recently, we got out this other book called Chasing Sopu, which looks at urban foraging. And the entire data, that is information that is collected, is from the women from the low income households who just, you wouldn't even think, for us, to our eye, they are weeds. But for them, that is a sopu, that is the leafy vegetables that they use in their diet. So, and it's growing these empty plots along ditches, along some plot under a flyover. So yes, I mean, all these are very, very important for a whole group of people. Just because we don't know about it, we assume that it is not there. So we should push for doing. It can be a neighborhood park that can, a part of it, which can become a garden for fruit, for vegetable listing. The main problem which comes is when it comes to sharing the produce. Right? Usually, we've heard this incident in an apartment complex where there was a small patch of land and a lady said, okay, nobody is using it. Does anybody want to use it? Nobody was showed any interest. So she started growing ginger. and turmeric. And she did a tremendously good job of it. And once the produce was there for harvest, everybody's like, we need to share, it's on common land. So how do you work out these things? That is the biggest challenge in a city. It seems so much simpler in a village where everybody seems to share, not to say that a romantic version of a village, but there is more sharing that comes naturally. In a city, it's not. So we have to first think of how do we share and then also do it. Otherwise, it just becomes conflict you don't want to deal with.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to this whole angle of how do you create that culture around one is sharing, and how do you look at common spaces in itself, right? Yeah, I think to this, Meghna is adding that allotments are a very common concept in UK cities as well, where land is set aside for people to grow food. So it's almost part of that. So I think we are almost out of time. We have 5 minutes left. And I think there's one question that maybe Krishna, if you had put a question on the chat, maybe you want to unmute and ask directly if you're on call.
Hi, I think I have written it. I was more curious that, the tree falling is one thing, but what about the tree who are living in a very detrimental sort of condition? They are chained, they are tagged with a different kind of brand. I mean, I have seen in Delhi, you go to any of the Mukherjee Nagar or Kamla Market near the university, they are chained and concreted, like their trunk is cemented till they choked it. So I was more concerned about it. Even I wrote to the VCs, and then I think there was a final sort of like a judgment from the NGT also, this deconcretization of the tree trunk, some sort of, but still the situation is not good. So I was wondering, I have never been to Bangalore or Chennai, what's the plight of those urban greens there? And is it the same, or if it is the same, then what are the civil societies or the local, how they're dealing with it?
See, it's mostly is the same. There's massive concretization right up to thing. But again, if we look at it, it's actually an interesting question, because if we look at it in different areas, we can see differences. You have given me another idea for a student project. So if you look at the center of the city, in some parts where they have left space around trees, there's some new roads have come up. But again, in some of the older parts, they have concreted right around. So what is this reason for the difference? No idea. We keep seeing this in the newspapers and people writing about it as well, saying, please stop concretizing, please have spaces between the stones so that water can seep in. I think this will again require a city level directive. Yeah. I mean, if this NGT thing was it given as an order?
Yes, I just want to share an anecdote. I was in my summer research fellowship in University of Goa. So there's a road widening was happening, and the new construction of a building of this University of Goa. And I saw it because I used to read Times of India, and I just saw it that NGT had sort of like allowed it in New Delhi, but what's happening in Goa is totally different. So I just wrote to an anonymous mail to VC, like, okay, this is happening, and sort of like I went physically to the contractor and was like, look, I don't know, I faked it, but it happened, and they left this like half-meter circle around the trees. But I assume that for sure there are some guidelines, and I mean, like if we see in the contrast in Europe, every city tree has to be this like 1.5 meter something. Even it is happening like where I'm sitting now. So they have this beautiful loose pebble thing, so that when the tree widening happen, it doesn't constrict the growth of tree, and it doesn't have this lump where most of the like when we become fat we have this.
Yeah, so I guess, see, by the time it comes down to the person who is planting or tiling the place, this whole set of instructions, at the end of the day, this is India. The trickle down, when it happens, it just ends up people just splotching cement, and what is the fuss you're making about trees is the question. So yeah, I mean, this will require, I'm sure there may be regulations, but it's not being followed. So this is something that could go into like an optimal tree act. How do you plant a tree? How should you plant a tree in a city? You have to leave area around. So this is all possible things that should be included. But how much detail can you say? You would think that people would have the sense to do it, but clearly other priorities take over.
I see. But I think as you were talking about the student project, one thing that could be done is like at least in the university campuses, that's, I don't know, talk to the VCs and like at least generate some momentum and deconcrete them. That will be like first start, or should say low hanging fruit, and then sort of like we can build around it, and then like, okay, it is happening in this campus, why it is not happening in this and this and this, and somewhere then it can spread to the city thing. That's all. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think Valari has something to add here. Maybe you can unmute and ask, share directly. Yeah.
Hi, Seema, I really wanted to thank you for this great talk. I have a ton of questions, but I will write to you separately regarding them.
Yes.
And I also just wanted to chime in with what Krishna was saying here. So Krishna, I'm in Delhi, and I've also been working around issues related to urban trees for a number of years. So there is a group of citizens. If you can just write to me, email me, or drop me a message, I can connect you with that group. And we can help you to take some action there in Delhi University for deconcretization of trees. It's a little bit challenging, but there are a lot of code directives for it. And recently a tree helpline number was set up by the Forest Department. So you can make use of those things and also get help from, other concerned citizens in that group and get this going.
Yeah, sure. I will, for sure, I will write to you, Larry. Thank you. I mean, what I do usually is I go with the student union because I'm a single person. So I usually sort of like, I would say, talk to them and then somehow sort of persuade them like, look, this is good for you because as you are a union, and if you represent some sort of environmental concern, it will be good for your campaigning and we should do it because this is good for tree, good for you, good for us. And some sort of, and they buy it sometimes, sometimes not.
Yeah, I'll just share my number with you in a private chat and you can connect with me and hopefully we can take this forward.
Sure.
Thanks
Thank you.
a lot.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Valari. So I think we are running. We are already over time. So maybe we can call this a close, and I can. Is that all right? Does anyone have any last questions? And maybe you can take it up right now. Otherwise, we can close this call. Okay. So I don't see anything coming up, and maybe we'll close this call. And like I said earlier, that we will share the recording of this talk. We will also share Seema's email ID in case you want to reach out to her directly for other questions or concerns. And yeah, thank you so much, Seema, for joining and for sharing such all your experience with us. And thank you everyone for joining this call. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.